Hi, Cecilia. Welcome. It's very nice to meet you, and thank you very much for joining me in my podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thanks again for being here. Cecilia, before we dive in, can you tell me a bit about yourself, how you discovered carnivore? How did it all start for you?
Sure. So, my name is Cecilia. I live in Arizona. I have been a carnivore since January 1st, 2018. So, my story is very, very long. But the reason why I found carnivore is I was at this place in my life where I was having these very horrific seizures that would throw me up against a wall. And because I had those seizures, I felt like my my disease that I had a genetic blood test for was actually worsening. And because of that, I knew I needed to find another solution. I had I had been I had a genetic blood test for Huntington's disease, which is a terminal genetic disease. It's like a combination of um, Parkinson's, bipolar, schizophrenia, and almost like ALS. So it's a very, doctors call it the worst disease on the planet. And I was really going through it a lot. So when I found the carnivore diet, I was very, very pleased with my results.
Yeah. Cecilia, your story is really amazing when I listened to it with Dr. Chafee. How you told, like, how your story came about and the transformation, finding it in 2018. That's really awesome. um have you spoken to other people who had the same disease, and like, how did that go?
Yes, I have. I have been on Facebook sharing my story. Immediately, I'm told by some people, not everyone, that my story is false because they've been told that that Huntington's disease is incurable. And my response is always like, well, it's incurable because pharmacologically they haven't found a cure yet. But that doesn't mean that what I've experienced isn't my truth. Everything that I've experienced has been, my own personal lived experience, as well as, what I've done is I've tried to eliminate the symptoms. And so you can't call it a cure, even if you eliminate the symptoms. You can't even call it remission in those groups because that's not acceptable, because that's not pharmacologically intelligent, I guess you could say. So I get a lot of backlash, but I also get patients who come to me and tell me that they've also experienced some good results from eating a ketogenic diet. So I'm actually going to interview one of those for my channel next week. I find, like, it's a mixed bag, but a lot of times people are very stuck into the paradigm of Huntington's disease rather than trying to find a way out. They're using pharmaceuticals to kind of act as band-aids. And I didn't want pharmaceuticals anymore. I had discovered by the time I was diagnosed, I'd gotten off all my pharmaceuticals. At one point, I was on prescription drugs for anxiety, bipolar, depression, and I was experiencing a lot of side effects from all of those medications, not to mention that I felt like a freaking zombie all day. And that was just something I wasn't willing to live with. When I actually went to go see the Huntington's disease excellence doctor to get my genetic blood test, he offered me an antidepressant, which I refused, and his eyes got all wide and he got a little angry and he said, well, why are you here? And I said, I'm here for that genetic blood test. I feel like I've been gaslit by a lot of different doctors all along the way, and I feel like that's true probably for a lot of people who are in the position that I was in. And so I fully understand their perspective, and I'm, able to put myself in their shoes. But I don't agree because of my own personal lived experience as well.
Yeah, I can just imagine, like, especially this devastating disease. I'm sure the struggle was just like unbearable. Like, what were you going through, like, when you were diagnosed pretty much in 2014, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how difficult was that? Like, yeah,
To get diagnosed or my symptoms?
the symptoms.
Okay. Yeah. So I was in a wheelchair. I'd been in a wheelchair since early, probably late 2013, off and on, until I would say October 2015. I had a lot of horrific seizures. I had movements. My movements were so bad, which is why I ended up in the wheelchair, because my movements were so bad I couldn't walk without falling. I had movements all over my body, movements in my face, movements in my neck, movements in my arms, my fingers, my torso, my legs, and my feet. And so it was just difficult for me to walk and to, pretty much do anything in life that you do for yourself. I had my my symptoms really were like, I had a lot of severe neurological pain in all those areas that were cramping. If you can imagine, like a Charlie horse cramp, but all over your body, that's never ending. That's pretty much what it's like. And the pain is just like even more horrific than just a Charlie horse cramp. Um, so I had so much pain everywhere too. And that was also part of the problem. I had it really would start, the movements would start with more dystonia, which is like a hardening of the muscles, hardening of the tendons into the kind of like that cramp. And then all of a sudden there would be movements after that. And the movements were so horrific, I couldn't keep my hands still. It was just moving a lot. You can see on my channel on Genetic Canary some of the symptoms that I had. They were pretty horrible. I just can't even like put it into words how painful it really was and what Huntington's disease patients experience. But I also had problems like swallowing my food, choking on my food, and then I had dementia. So I didn't know when my husband left the house. I didn't know what really was going on a lot of times. I couldn't count, and I couldn't dress myself or bathe myself. So I was pretty bad. We were discussing having help in the home, but I kept refusing it because it gave me so much anxiety to think about someone else in the house. And then also I didn't want to like bathe in front of people. I didn't want to, you know what I mean? I just didn't want that. And so we struggled a long time trying to figure out what to do with my situation. And because of the seizures that I was having, it actually worsened all of my symptoms. So a lot of times I was in a dark room alone, or I wore a mask a lot, even though it was dark. It wasn't dark enough. The lights would affect me. Noises would affect me. Sound. I already said that. Smells would affect me. So it was like a lot. It was a lot all the time. And I was really sick. After I got diagnosed, I went home thinking that, I didn't feel like I was going to live because I was having such terrible problems. I couldn't see how I would live at that time. I mean, it was from one dramatic situation to the next all day long. it was constant. The pain was constant. And with pain like that, it just like, that's all you can focus on is the pain and how horrible it feels. And so that was my life for at least a year, if not more than that. And so I was, I needed to find a solution. So that's what, I started to do. I did end up getting out of my wheelchair by eating more whole foods, because before then I was eating a lot of processed foods, fast food, restaurant food. I don't, at that time I didn't really fully understand all of that, why that was part of the issue. But we decided to go more whole foods. And I did that, as well as yoga, and I was able to get out of my wheelchair thanks to also cannabis oil. Cannabis oil helped me combat the pain that I was experiencing, and so I was able to do that. Now, this was in 2014 to 2015. I would say probably around it was the summer of 2015 when I really started implementing a whole foods diet. It was more vegetarian or vegan at that time. My seizures didn't stop, but I was able to get out of my wheelchair and get stronger with those methods. Now, because my seizures didn't stop, I felt like my disease was still worsening. Yes, I had gotten out of my wheelchair, but I was still having a lot of pain. I couldn't go far from my smoking station to smoke cannabis. I also was on cannabis oil, which helped, but it was just almost like I was tied to that because the pain was so terrible. So we thought about moving to a legal state, because I was in Texas at the time, and in Texas it's a felony to have cannabis oil. So we moved to a legal state. We moved to Colorado. When I moved to Colorado, I was still having horrible seizures. I still took cannabis oil, but it didn't stop my seizures. So we're talking, I started getting worse, and I was having troubles walking again. I was having trouble, even though I was still on my whole foods diet, I was still having trouble with those things. And so we were again talking about having help come into the home. And I was like, no, I don't want that. And so I came across a video by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, and I was just inspired to keep listening. So I listened to her. I did research over the next 6 months to see, is this something someone could really do, not eat vegetables? Because that was kind of like my confusion. Back in 2015, I found this book while I was in my wheelchair called Candida and Parkinson's. And this book is by a microbiologist. Her name is Lydia Epps. You can find it on Amazon. And she talked about how her doctor put her on a no plants diet, basically just meat. And the reason why she said that worked for Parkinson's in particular was because it had a lot of our vegetables and things have oxalates in them. And those oxalates come in and they combine with the yeast in your body or the candida in your body, and they create a hardening over your tendons. So it makes it almost like, Parkinson's patients have a bradykinesia where they walk kind of slow, or, they have problems doing that. They don't necessarily have the same movements as Huntington's disease, but there is a movement component. And so I thought that was really interesting when I read that. And so I remembered that when I saw Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride talking about how her neurological patients had gotten better by eating this GAPS diet that she promoted. So I got the book. I read the book for 6 months. My husband and I discussed it. And we came to the conclusion that based off of those two books, that I should do the no plants version. At that time, she talked about it a little bit in her videos, but her book didn't fully reflect it. And so what I did was I went and I used the GAPS protocol, but made sure I wasn't eating any plants. I did at first eat a little bit of the sauerkraut, but I was like, no, this isn't right. So instead I would just drink the sauerkraut juice, and it's supposed to act like kind of like as a probiotic to help you digest your food better. So I started that on January 1st, 2018. My last horrific seizure was on April 18th, 2018. I ended up in the hospital because it was a 14-hour seizure that was just never ending. And usually I would try to just kind of like wait it out. But this was so horrific. That's why I ended up in the hospital with it. But I didn't allow them to give me any drugs because I felt like, for me, because of everything that I was diagnosed with, and one of them was NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, I didn't want any more drugs because they had given me handfuls to take 3 times a day for years. And I just didn't want any drugs. So I told them no drugs. They just kind of watched me until it was over. But it lasted so long. That was the longest seizure I'd ever had. And it was the last horrific seizure that I had until I went to the doctor, or almost right before I went to the doctor in 2020. My husband at the time ended up in the hospital. He had some complications, and it was it was just an awful time. But because I ended up in the hospital with him, not that I was hospitalized, but I was there all the time, I had to eat. And in the hospital, there's not a lot of foods that you can eat. You can't just get a hamburger patty. The cafeteria wasn't open. It was more like, here's some sandwiches and here's some fruit, etc. I stayed away from the fruit because I was like, no, that's a bad idea. But I did eat the sandwiches with meat. And so I thought, okay, I haven't gotten a seizure. I'm doing all right, right? I'm eating bread. Maybe I can go back to the standard American diet and just kind of tweak it a little bit. So he was there for 2 weeks. For about a month, I ate a standard American diet. And it was toward the end of that month when I got a little seizure, and I was like, nope, going back to my diet. But because that happened, I contacted my doctor for some blood work. I told him all the things that I had had. Remember, I had moved from Texas to Colorado, so they don't have all of my records, right? Because it's a new doctor. But when I was there, they tested everything I'd ever been diagnosed with, and it was all gone. All of it. Everything was normal. All my blood work was normal. I hadn't had normal blood work in like 17 years. And it was all gone. And I was like, oh yeah, definitely going back on the diet. Yeah.
That's amazing, Cecilia. I feel like your journey's quite very difficult. Ever since you were diagnosed, even before you were diagnosed, you were already going through the rough times. I think you mentioned, you were eating fast food, restaurant foods a lot. I think getting help with cannabis, yeah, and trying, maybe going back to the SAD diet, and then eventually trying GAPS and then carnivore. Yeah, that your journey is quite a long, painful one, and then you transforming yourself, thriving in carnivore now. This is really awesome. Cecilia, so did you had like maybe before finding out carnivore, did you had like any assumption, like what was the root cause of your disease? You think it could be a specific food trigger, or it could be stress in life in general, or maybe genetics? Yeah, did you had many assumptions?
Well, before I got my genetic test, no, I didn't know why. Part of me wondered if it was all the drugs they had me on. if it was all the procedures that I've had over my lifetime, because I have had many. But when I got the test, the genetic test, I started thinking about it from a different perspective. You know, I had a genetic predisposition to have Huntington's disease, to have movements. But I feel like on top of that, because I had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and lots of Huntington's disease patients have liver problems. It's part of the disease. And so I felt like, okay, it was a combination of the processed foods that I grew up eating. I also ate meat. We always had a meat when I was a child. We always had a vegetable. It was usually a frozen vegetable, not a fresh vegetable. Excuse me. We also had usually potatoes or something from a box, or rice, but it was usually from a box. So I feel like it's all part of it. You know, all the drugs that you take, everything that you do will affect your body, and it will create autoimmune problems if you have a genetic predisposition. And most people don't have genetic tests. I'm rare, and then I was able to get one, but you almost have to go through all of these protocols to even get those tests these days. Even MTHFR is difficult to get a test for. You have to go to the right doctor. You have to say the right things, blah, 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 blah. It's almost like you have to fit their paradigm in order for them to give you the genetic test. So most of us are running around with genetics, and we don't know it until we get sick. So was it the genetics that came first? Was it the food that like added to the problem? Was it all the drugs that added to the problem? All the surgical procedures that add to the problem? It's hard to say. All I wanted though was a solution. All I wanted was to feel better, to feel normal, to be able to live my life. And I'm so thankful that I did find the solution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I feel like the only thing I was looking for also was just solution. It's endless assumption, you know, but no answer until I found pretty much a solution, the carnivore. Cecilia, how did you notice the changes? So when you, you know, I think you were already having good result with the GAPS diet, right? Like, but like switching to carnivore, like, you know, just an example, like with my health issue, you know, I went carnivore trying to fix a specific issue, but then it came like, you know, with a bundle of health benefits I didn't expect. There was so much more that came with it. Like, how did you notice any changes? Like, was it something gradual, or did your mood started changing, or something specifically change?
Well, my seizures stopped. To me, that was the biggest, thank goodness. That was the biggest thing for me, you know, was after that, then I noticed that my body was getting stronger. We lived in Manitou Springs in Colorado, which was right around the corner from Garden of the Gods. You could hike to it from where we lived. So I started doing gentle hikes to begin with, walking through the neighborhood to Garden of the Gods, and then walking back home, because it's a long trail to go all the way into Garden of the Gods. So I did it gradually. Eventually, by the end of that summer, I was able to hike to the top of Garden of the Gods and do more, I guess, you know, like hikes that were harder to do. So I just gradually became stronger, and that was my like, wow, okay, my body's liking this. I no longer had problems like with as much pain either. And so then I was able to, you know, be away from like cannabis and just kind of work through walking like a normal person. I no longer had to use the wheelchair cart at the grocery store. My moods they were so much better, of course, because I wasn't in so much pain. I wasn't having seizures that would, cause other issues with mood. I wasn't having those things. And so I was starting to feel so much better. Now, to say that I was better overnight is not the truth. It took me a long time to feel better overall in all of these areas. I would say by the time I guess it was 2021 when we left Colorado. By the time we left Colorado, I was like a different person than the person who had moved into Colorado. So 4 years later, I was able to walk on my own, go to the grocery store by myself, drive again. I was able to, I remember we moved that at the end of that, and I pretty much moved the entire house by myself. I packed everything by myself, etc. There's no way that I did that when we left Texas. We just left Texas with what we could put in the car kind of thing. And I didn't pack the car. So, it was just so much different. And now when I'm thinking about my life now, even more so, it's even more different now. Now I live my life. My husband passed. So now I had to become my own backbone and take care of bills, take care of stress, etc. I don't have any problem doing that now. But if I had tried to do that back in 2014, that would have just started a whole seizure cluster or something like that, where I'd be in the bed for the whole week over one bill or something like that. And so that's just how my life has just really fully changed.
Wow. Yeah, that's completely amazing. Cecilia, I know, because your journey has been a painful one, like especially those years. I know it's probably very depressing and difficult. What is your motivation now? Is it like that can pretty much treat this disease, or just spreading awareness in general? Or are you frustrated with the current medical health guidelines? I think you talk about like being gaslit by medical professionals, and we're kind of left alone finding answers, or just pretty much helping people, just be aware.
Yeah. Well, I am a medical intuitive now in Sedona at Crystal Magic Psychic Center. My goal now is to help people feel better. I always tell them that I'm looking for nutritional things to help them feel better. I look at their astrology chart to see what they're nutritionally deficient in every single day. And it does show all of that. For example, my chart is ruled by Mercury, and I need thiamine the most every single day. So it'll kind of tell you what you need based off of your astrology chart. It'll also show you like each body part there, how it's associated, and you can tell with what keeps repeating. My goal now is really just to help people feel better overall, holistically. I really do feel like, going down the path of pharmaceuticals is a Band-Aid. And when you're living with something as traumatic as Huntington's disease, there are only so many Band-Aids you could use before you get worse and worse and worse because of the side effects of all of those medications. I feel like there's Ingrezza, for example, for a Huntington's disease patient, which is supposed to kind of like mitigate the movements. But it comes with the side effect of suicide, which is something that Huntington's disease patients have to deal with anyway as part of the disease. So I feel like there's always another solution that's more natural, holistic, that's more bioavailable to the body, that's more long lasting. And so even though it took me a long time to get to where I am now, I wouldn't do it any other way. Because if I had stayed on the pharmaceuticals, I would not be here today. So My goal really in sharing my story is to let people know that there's another path forward that you can take. That is more sure for you than drugs, than prescription drugs. And I feel like in sharing my story, I also want to promote awareness for Huntington's disease, that it is the most horrible disease on the planet. You end up in, so let me explain what that means so people understand. You can't, by the end of Huntington's disease, by the end, and I'm talking when you're closer to death, you can't talk, you can't walk, you can't express your emotions except for tears. You're often strapped to a bed because your movements are so bad that you'll fall out of the bed. And then it ends in death. So this person can't communicate, cannot, it's almost like a person is there. It's the shell of the human body, but the person is just not there because they're in so much pain and they're having difficulty expressing themselves, all of that. And it's the worst. It's just the worst. To see someone actually in that is traumatic just to watch, but to live it is the worst. So when I share my story, it's out of compassion for that community, even though they may not believe me, even though, they discount me. I share this so that they can see that there is a possible another path forward. And just because it's the worst disease on the planet doesn't mean there aren't other diseases that are bad too, like Parkinson's or fibromyalgia or MS or, just basically anything that you have that could go wrong with the human body. I do fully believe that the carnivore diet can help anyone feel better regardless of the disease. And it's really about feeding the body nutrition that it really needs. And because we've grown up in this world where processed food and fast food is the norm, most people don't understand until they get into a point where they have to find another solution. But that's only if they're not okay with what they've been presented with. And I wasn't okay with that. I thought, well, there's got to be a better solution than what I've been given. A lot of doctors will pass you around to other doctors. We have specialists now. So they'll move you around from specialist to specialist to specialist. For example, my hand in 2019 was going like this, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all night long on the bed. I could not rest because it was doing that all night and it was painful. So they sent me to a hand specialist. They sent me to someone who does like physical therapy. The physical therapist tried to help me, but I was in so much pain. It was difficult for me to do the exercises that they wanted me to do. So then I got sent to someone else to put a steroid injection in my arm. It didn't work. Then I was sent to, it was kind of like that. And so I went and saw a neurologist. Actually, I finally went to go see a chiropractor because I was like, these people aren't helping me. They're just passing me around. And the chiropractor was like, well, this is a nerve problem. You need to go see a neurologist. I'm gonna recommend, and I'm gonna contact this neurologist for you and tell him that I recommend that you go see them. So they did a nerve conduction test, and I was told that that I would lose my left arm, the ability to use it. This was back in 2013 when this happened, or maybe 2012. And they said, I would lose it within a few years. I still use it. Hi, this is it. This is it right here. I'm still using it. Anyway, so it was, and then they passed me on to another neurologist who tried to give me a bunch of drugs, right? And she did, and I took them. Then they passed me to a different neurologist at some point. That neurologist told me I had tardive dyskinesia. And then that's when my estranged sister and I started contacting each other, and I realized she had problems that were similar to my problems, not as bad, but similar. And so I had already made an appointment myself to see this specialist in Houston, which was 4 hours away from where I lived. I had to send 500 pages of my medical documents to him. That inspired me to get my own documents. Then I started digging into my own medical records, looking at medical studies like through PubMed and trying to understand it and figure it out myself, because the doctors kept gaslighting me and telling me basically it was all in my head, that it was a psychological problem that was causing these physical symptoms. And I thought, well, that just didn't seem right to me, especially when my sister contacted me and I was like, well, it's got to be genetic then if my sister has similar symptoms. And I remember her asking me what I thought it was. And I said, well, I think it's Huntington's, but I don't want it to be Huntington's, but that's what I think it could be. And this was the doctor that also was a Huntington's disease excellence doctor, but he also did psychosomatic disease. So he had written a couple of papers about those things, and that's why I wanted to see him, and that's how I found him. Because they say that psychosomatic disease is basically psychological disease that presents in the body as movements, or, you know, that causes problems, physical problems. So I remember seeing him and he said, you know, I didn't have any of that. He insisted he was correct about it. Again, gaslighting me, take your antidepressant, you'll be fine. And, you know, it wasn't until I got the blood test results back that I was just like, I knew. They came back positive. I knew, you know, and I just did the thing. And that was the last, like, a specialist that I ever saw, because I was so tired of being gaslit. I was like, okay, obviously they can't help me figure this out. Same thing with seizures. They couldn't help. They really should have given me like 3 EKGs, but only, or EEG, whatever the test was for seizures. But they only gave me one. And then they made the determination based off of my other doctor saying I was psychosomatic or that it was all in my head. They made the determination again that that was correct, rather than giving me the 2 additional tests, which that's what you need to diagnose seizures. And they didn't do that. So I felt like I was just gaslit every single time I went to the doctor. So when I see people come into, and they come in to see me, I hear similar stories from them too, that they've been gaslit, that they've been passed around from doctor to doctor. You know, we really need a PCP, and only see that PCP for everything. We need a doctor that just sees you for everything in order for them to figure it out, because you only get 15 minutes in a doctor's office, which I think is ridiculous. My sessions are at least 45 minutes. I need to know all the things. How can you figure out in 15 minutes what's wrong with someone? And they don't even know anything about insulin resistance. They don't put 2 and 2 together that, okay, this patient's on drugs for diabetes and they're on drugs for hyperparathyroidism things, and they have high calcium and they have this and this and this and this. They compartmentalize everything. And so part of the reason why I'm wanting to speak out is to let people know, 1, there's another solution. 2, no, you're not wrong and feeling like you're being gaslit. And 3, to get better. That's it. I just, you know, everyone wants to feel better. Some people want to feel better with drugs and they want to take that as a Band-Aid, and that works for a time for them. But at some point, it's not going to work anymore, because that's how drugs work. You always have to continuously increase the dosage of drugs. And when you increase, and you've gone to the highest you can go to, how do you come back to a baseline and still be healthy? So the reason why I do what I do is to help other people feel better, and just to know that there's another solution out there.
Cecilia, I really like your motivation, helping people to feel better, and also, letting them know that there's another solution, not just like the band-aid approach with the medical experts. And I feel like this is one of those stories that stresses me, like hospital stories, like experience wise, being gaslighted, being passed around to different specialists, and then being told that now they determine that you're psychosemantic, and that even adds, even worse to the experience. I feel like adds more to the stress, but and you've overcome all of them, which is
Hmm.
really the amazing part. Cecilia, so looking back at the start of your carnivore journey, when you jump into it after your research, were there any mistakes you made, and what and how did you learn from them?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't feel like there were any mistakes that I made with the carnivore diet because I stuck to all animal foods. At some point, like I tried that diet for, I think it was, I did that diet for about 5 to 6 months. The GAPS no plants diet. That to me was a really great way to start because it was kind of like an elimination diet and going back to the basics of having meat stock and then cooking your meat and your eggs in the meat stock. Uh, but for me, I really wanted to go to a more carnivore diet, which is, I'd already started watching Dr. Ken Berry, so I followed his advice. I just felt like as long as I was sticking to animal foods, I was doing just fine. That's not to say I didn't tweak it, though. I tweaked it based off of how my body was feeling. So, for example, I would eat, like, we ate chicken with the skin on it. We got thighs, right? I made chicken soups. I did ground beef patties. I did steaks. Steaks were my favorite, by the way. Ribeyes. Oh, I'm still in love with ribeyes, and I've been eating them for so long. I just like, it's like, ooh, a steak. um, I did eggs for a long time until my body didn't like eggs anymore, but I feel like it was mostly, they put a lot of stuff, right? There's vaccines for chickens, etc. They don't have them eating the bugs. I feel like that's important for me in order not to feel sick from the eggs. So I'm, currently looking for a farmer, for example, that has these kinds of eggs and who doesn't do grains and things like that. So there are little things that I noticed along the way, like I can't eat as much pork anymore. People recommend lamb, especially for neurological disease. I don't find that I do well on lamb. And so I feel like what I do is I look at how is my body responding to the foods that I'm eating. So, for example, I have a scale. I get on it every single morning just to see how my body is reacting with inflammation. And I can tell, especially after I eat lamb or pork, that I gain weight. There's inflammation there. Most people are just fine with that, and that's great for them. But for me, it's a steak, it's tuna, it's shellfish. I eat a lot of crab, in particular to absorb the iron, because without copper, it's more difficult for my body to do so. That's also in the research that's available for nutrition. And so I also drink whole milk. It's whole milk from a farm that I get at the grocery store that doesn't have synthetic vitamin D. For a little while, when I would drink milk, it had synthetic vitamin D and would make me sick. I thought it was the milk, but it wasn't the milk. It was the synthetic vitamin D in the milk. I eat cheese. I don't eat a ton of cheese every day, but I eat cheese a little bit. I feel like there is a 2-to-1 ratio of calcium to magnesium that we need to honor. And if we aren't getting enough calcium, then we need ever increasing amounts of magnesium. And I found like that was true for my diet. And so I honor that, which means that I drink a quart of milk a day. And if I don't drink a quart of milk a day, I notice my body's reaction. And the first reaction that I get is usually a hardening that I can feel in my left arm. And I feel it there. I don't necessarily feel it in my right arm, but I feel it in my left arm. I'm like, okay, I got to get back to my milk, or I got to make sure I'm eating enough steak, or did I have copper today? Did I have any shellfish today? I need tuna for the selenium. So I just kind of like look at it from that perspective. What do I nutritionally need every day? How is my body feeling? How can I tweak my diet to make sure that I'm feeling my best? A lot of times before now I don't do that, but before I used to do a food journal and write everything down. How is my body feeling 1 to 3 hours after eating? Is there belching? Is there bloating? Do I feel tired, etc. Right? And then 1 to 3 days after I ate that, how is my body feeling from that food? Now I don't need to do that. Now I'm just like, I just kind of know what's going on and what my body needs, and I give it to it. So that's it. That's how I've been doing it. I haven't really had any stumbling blocks other than the fact that I've had to remove certain carnivore foods from my diet, like pork, and I don't eat chicken very much because I don't feel like there's enough fat on the chicken, and my body doesn't it's not happy. So I just feed it what makes it happy. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's quite a list there. And I mean, would you say that's a typical day or week of eating look like for you now? Or do you, because you talk about twitching it, do you pretty much stay consistent, or do you switch things up from time to time?
I switch things up from time to time. Currently, I'm eating a ribeye a day. I eat a can of tuna, and I usually have some crab, as well as, 2 or 3 glasses of milk a day. A little bit of cheese here and there, but I didn't even eat cheese yesterday or a couple of days. Actually, it's been a few days since I've had cheese, and I'm okay. It's just kind of like whatever my body needs. Sometimes I don't want red meat at all. And sometimes I will just eat fish. I'll eat salmon, or I'll eat tuna. Tuna's a big one for me, I think, because it has so much selenium in it. I also do sardines. And it really just depends on what my body needs at that time. If I'm feeling like my body won't do well with a ribeye, then I will eat sardines, because sardines has more iron in it, etc. And it just has all the components you really need in it, including the calcium. So I just kind of switch it up. Just depends on what's going on, but that's my normal thing. Almost every day I eat a ribeye, because I notice that I feel so much better when I do.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like, yeah, ruminant meat is the best, I
Mm-hmm.
think you talk about not eating pork and chicken as much anymore. I think, same experience for me, pretty much. Yeah. Um, Cecilia, so is there anything hard or maybe difficult with being carnivore for you? Examples of this, for me would be like social gatherings with family and friends who are non-carnivore, right? And
Mm-hmm.
also traveling, you have to scout the locations, if there's something that I can eat so I don't starve. Cravings in the beginning that took me a while to get it out of my system, like over a year, or maybe maybe skepticism from, again, from family and friends. But what about for you? Anything hard or difficult?
Well, eating out is difficult for sure. It's difficult to find a place that doesn't have seed oils, although more and more are starting to come through where there isn't seed oils. Like In and Out is a place that a lot of people eat at. If I'm let's say I'm taking a day trip somewhere, I'm going to take my food with me. I'm not going to stop at a fast food joint and get something that could possibly make me feel sick for the rest of the day and into the next week. I am going to, have a cold steak probably that I've made the night before and take it with me with some cheese and maybe some milk and, put it in a cooler and take it with me. I'd rather do that than actually eat fast food. But if I'm going to go, for example, if someone wants to go out to eat, I'll be like, okay, but I can only go to certain places that I know will fix my steak the way I need it fixed without any seed oils, etc. So that's like Texas Roadhouse, Sizzler. Those are the only two options. There's probably another private option around where I live. But I always have to call ahead too. Let's say if I'm in a different city and those places aren't available, I have to call ahead and say, hey, do you accommodate people's dietary restrictions? If there's a family event and they all want to go out to eat, again, I will call that restaurant and say, how can you help me with my dietary restrictions? Is there a certain food that I can eat that doesn't have these things? Buffalo Wild Wings is great because they cook everything in tallow. So I love that. My biggest thing probably is that unless they're friends and they know me, or family and they know me, most people are shocked that I don't eat vegetables. That's like the biggest thing I get. You don't eat vegetables? It's not about the fruit, but it's about the vegetables. Like, how dare you? You don't eat how are you alive? So I get that a lot. And I have to explain, why I eat the way that I do. There is a lot of skepticism. Even people who know my story and who have heard about my miraculous recovery with, geez, I don't know. I was looking at my list here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 diseases that I've healed using this diet. And I'm telling them about all the diseases. And they're still skeptical. And, and then they push me like, why aren't you, like, I just don't understand. Really? Did you really heal all that stuff? I mean, I have to go through the gamut of what I've healed in order for them to fully understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's almost like I've got to prove my case each and every time. That gets a little old sometimes, if I'm being honest. But at the same time, I also know that it's education that they probably aren't going to hear from anybody else. It's very rare. Most people don't know, think that carnivore is just a fad diet, don't really fully understand that this is a ketogenic diet that's been studied for decades. And, I try to explain it to them as gently as I can. But I do get a lot of disbelief and skepticism, and that's okay. It's healthy to have a little bit of that. But once I start explaining everything, they generally do tend to be like, okay, I understand why you're doing it. But they don't always move into the place of like, oh, I should do that for myself. They don't always move into that place until they get to a place of desperation, I feel like,
Yeah, I completely agree with that one. I think, I really like that experience you mentioned. You talked about family and friends, the healthy skepticism, and how you mentioned, until they get to that desperation. Because in my own observation, I feel like that is very true. whoever tries carnivore, there's always a degree of desperation, before them actually jumping onto it or even just attempting it. So I think that's very true. Cecilia, so if you had to describe the impact of carnivore in your life, what one word would you describe it, and tell me why?
Miraculous. Because when you're diagnosed with something, as I was diagnosed with, I went home and I had zero hope. I just was ready to die. To think about that time in my life even to think about it is a little traumatic because of everything that I really experienced. So I would say that it gave me so much hope and turned my life around. I really never expected this kind of success in the fact that every disease I was ever diagnosed with was gone. And to live my life and be able to enjoy my life and live day to day and wake up not worrying about whether or not this was the day I was going to have such a bad seizure I die, or without worrying about what's going to happen that day, and just being happy to be alive. It's miraculous. This diet is miraculous, and to state it in any other way is belittling its benefits. It's just to live my life every single day with hope in my heart, to know that now what I'm doing is creating hope for others through my own personal journey, helping others find their hope, helping others feel better and eliminate their own personal disease it's nothing short of miraculous that I'm still here, that I'm still able to do this. And I'm just so grateful every single day just to get up and drive myself to work, walk myself to work. These are things that we kind of take for granted, that we're able to walk and talk like a regular human being and bathe ourselves and dress ourselves and, all of those things that we need to do every day just to be human. And there was a time when I didn't think that I'd ever get to this point. So yeah, just miraculous.
That's really beautiful, Cecilia. I feel like, I feel like we people tend to just take everything for granted. I think I do agree with that. Like, especially with just like walking, because it's an everyday thing, right? But some people can't walk and they go through different pains and struggle, and like what you went through is really painful and difficult. Yeah. Cecilia, so with all the things you've learned about carnivore, if you can give an advice to someone who maybe just want to start carnivore and they have a chronic pain issue, or they have a similar issue like you, Huntington disease, but they're very skeptical. Maybe it's a healthy skepticism, and they think they're going to get a heart attack or some kind of heart issue, they hear from the media. What would you tell them now?
I would tell them that Ansel Keys' research was aligned with his purpose, which was to get people to eat less fat. But our brains are composed of 60% fat. We need to feed our brains what it needs. And if we don't feed our brain what it needs, then that's where there's atrophy. That's where there's problems with the brain shrinking away from the skull, which is what happens in Huntington's disease. Their brains actually shrink. And then I'd say, you know, you're having all these movements basically because you need more magnesium in your diet, and that's what meat provides. Without meat, you're not getting that magnesium, you're not getting the iron, you're not getting the protein, you're not getting the B12 that your body needs. I also would explain that cholesterol is not a bad thing. The higher you have in your cholesterol and your LDL, the longer you will live. There are studies that show that that is true. On top of that, cholesterol, or the fat in milk, eliminates and removes from the body oxalates, oxalic acid, and things that oxalic acid does cause kidney stones. It causes problems there, not to mention that it's the hardening that occurs over the tendons that start the cramping, that starts the movements to begin with. These are all things that I would kind of go through and tell them, this is why this is a better diet for you, not to mention that it is a proper human diet. It is a diet that humans have been on since the beginning, since cavemen times. At that time, all we could do was hunt and gather. And gather meant that we would eat whatever berries were, you know, naturally in season. We didn't go to a grocery store to get the berries that were, you know, raised or grown somewhere else in order for them to be in the grocery store. We ate what we could find. And it's in that eating that humans were able to evolve into what we are now. And so going back to an ancestral way of eating is important, especially for Huntington's disease, which I believe comes from the oldest DNA on the planet. It is really, there's certain mtDNAs, which is the matriarchal DNA, comes from the mother, and that they're called different alleles, right? So there's the H, H1, H2, H3. All of those are affected in Huntington's disease. And that, when you go and you look into it further, the H allele is the mitochondrial Eve of everyone, which means it's the mother of all. And so understanding it from that perspective also helps you understand why eating ancestrally is the best way to eat. So I would say all of those things.
This is very well said, Cecilia. I'm going to look up some of these also. You know, I think I've noted a lot of things that you've mentioned. I think it's important for all of us to pretty much do our research, which I really agree. Cecilia, I had this question in the back of my head, and I actually forgot this in the beginning. Because you mentioned about, you know, you in the past you like to eat fast food and restaurant foods. What was your favorite food back then?
It was always burgers, because I still like meat, but I'd get a Whataburger, which has a huge bun, and I'd eat the bun. I'd eat the vegetables. I am Hispanic, so enchiladas were big in my house. I made enchiladas. I made Mexican foods. All of them had like a ton of spices on them. I can't eat any spices these days. I can't have garlic or any of those things. So garlic, cumin, you know, all of that stuff is just like, I love Mexican food too. I mean, guacamole, etc., right? But those are things I just can't eat anymore.
Yeah, completely agree. Cecilia, my last question to you is your future outlook on this community. How do you see carnivore evolving maybe in the next couple of years? Let's say 5 to 10 years. Do you see carnivore being in a good light, in a bad light, meaning censorship in the media, pushback from the standard medical approach. Also, maybe being banned from social media, meat prices going high. And also in the good side, we'll see more people talk about this, listening to small podcasts like this one. Because there's so much healing, many people desperate to find ways to treat their disease. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the increasing meat prices are a challenge for sure. To think about how much it costs. I mean, I'm in Arizona, so it's a little bit more expensive here than some other parts of the country. That part is challenging for a lot of people starting their carnivore diet and moving into that direction once they find out exactly how expensive it is now. When I started in Texas, it wasn't that, or I wasn't in Texas, in Colorado, it wasn't that expensive. It was kind of like you get ground beef, you do that things, you get a bunch of eggs, right? And you can still do that now. I personally don't like to eat ground beef anymore. There's something about, I'm not sure if they're putting something in it, but it just doesn't, my body doesn't react the same to it. So it's not good for me. And so that means I have to eat a ribeye. Ribeyes here are $25 a ribeye. That's a lot every single day. $25 a day. Basically, that's just for the ribeye. That's not for the tuna. That's not for the crab. That's not for the milk, the cheese, right? So it's getting quite expensive if I'm being honest. However, it's a lot less expensive than going to the doctor. And so it's really all about the perspective that you have on it, I believe. Now, where is carnivore going down the road? I'm hoping it's going somewhere good. More and more of us are stepping up, telling our stories so that we can encourage others to take on this way of life, to feel better in their bodies, to feel better in their health. My biggest concern is Lancet. Lancet came out a few years ago saying that they wanted to reduce 80% consumption of meat worldwide. Thanks to some changes, we're no longer in the WHO, we're, the United States isn't, etc. But there's still that push by certain cities to go toward more of a plant-based approach in their diet. So I feel like there's definitely a pushback to carnivore. I do feel like, some of this stuff does get, like by social media, Google, all of those big names, right, that are watching over us, that they want to kind of sweep carnivore under the rug because they'd rather be, getting some income from people taking drugs. And I'm not saying there's like, social media, they got a lot of branches out there, right? So the owners of these things are also lots of owners of pharmaceutical companies and different things like that. And so, and then processed food companies, etc., right? So they don't really want to hear our story. They don't really want it to get out as much as it has been. So I feel like there's going to be even like, it's going to try to do it even more to kind of like shadow ban people so that their information doesn't get out. I have noticed that on my channel, that if I speak about certain things and all of a sudden my numbers go down and I'm like, that's weird, right? Because I know that I have good content, but it's kind of like it's all part of the game. And they don't want people to know that because then they make less money with all of their different ventures. So I do feel like there are people like us that's still going to be telling all the people around them, regardless if we're on social media or not, how great we're doing and why it's happening that way. And word of mouth has definitely gotten around. Sometimes I'm surprised when someone comes and sits down in my chair and they're like, yeah, so I saw that you do carnivore and I just want to tweak my diet. Can you help me do that? And I'm like, oh, yay, a carnivore person. So, there's more and more of us out there than have ever been before. So that does give me hope. It's really just about trying to share your story as much as you can with others and inspire them to look down a different path. And that's all we can really do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty hopeful for the future. I like your outlook. I think there's some things that scares me. Some things that I think is going the right way, but overall, it's a mix for me. But yeah, I really like your outlook. Cecilia, if people want to reach out or connect, if they have questions, I feel like your whole journey, your whole experience, really left a strong impression on me. Where's the best
Thank
place
you.
can they reach you?
So all my health journey, where you can see videos of my symptoms of what I was like before, is on Genetic Canary on YouTube. I am also available on Tarot of the Nines with the number 9, and on Instagram, Facebook, and even YouTube. I do have some like little health readings that I do on Tarot of the Nine that are free. So I do want to encourage, if anyone's kind of struggling, to kind of look at those. If you have any questions, you can contact me on Instagram. I am on Facebook under Cecilia Castaneda. You can follow me there. That's often where I will post things like that I find that's really interesting about health. But yeah, those are the places that you can contact me on. And if you're looking for a medical intuitive reading, you can find all that information on Tarot of the Nines on Instagram or Facebook.
This is awesome. I'm going to make sure to post all of them in the description so people can reach you. Cecilia, thank you so much again for joining me. I really enjoy listening to your story, your perspective, and learning about your whole carnivore journey. I appreciate you taking the time to share.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to share with someone who understands. So thank you.